When we speak of our senses, sight, hearing, taste, touch, and smell, it's tempting to think of them as simple instruments, tools, devices that passively take in information about the world. But this is a fundamental error, both biologically and psychologically. Our senses are not mechanical. They are not interchangeable data ports. They are ancient systems, refined across millions of years, not just for perceiving the world, but for surviving in it. Every living being with a nervous system relies on sensory perception not just to observe, but to act. This is critical. We don't perceive in order to contemplate. We perceive in order to move. We perceive in order to make decisions. And this truth should humble us. Think of sight, for example. The eye is not just a camera. It doesn't passively take in whatever light strikes it. It selects. It focuses. It filters. It excludes almost everything. You don't see everything in front of you. You see what matters to you. That's why two people can look at the same scene and see entirely different things. The eye follows your interest, and your interest is shaped by your values, your fears, your needs, and your purpose. If you're hungry, you see food. If you're afraid, you see threats. If you're lost, you scan for paths. The point is that your senses are not neutral. They are value-laden instruments of orientation. That principle applies across all five senses. Hearing is not just sound. It's meaning. We don't just register vibrations. We extract speech, tone, threat, music. A child, hearing a parent's footsteps down the hall, knows whether to smile or hide, not because they measured the sound waves, but because their nervous system has tied sensory input to emotional memory. This makes sense because our brains are not built to process raw data. They're built to predict, to anticipate, to prepare. Our senses feed into that system, forming the bridge between external chaos and internal order. There's a reason we call them super senses in this context, not to glorify children with unusual perception, but to reawaken a lost understanding of how powerful these tools really are. We've become numb to the miracle of perception. But when you begin to pay attention to how deeply sensory experience structures your world, you start to see that these basic faculties are anything but basic. They are the ground floor of everything you know, everything you feel, everything you decide. To know your senses is to know the foundation of your being. And it doesn't stop there. When a child begins to explore their senses, not just use them, but truly become aware of them, they are beginning a process that mirrors the hero's journey. They step out of the predictable, automated reactions of early childhood and into a more refined engagement with reality. They begin to notice the difference between pleasure and indulgence, between noise and music, between color and significance. This is the beginning of self-mastery, because to be aware of your senses is to take the first step in mastering how you relate to the world. So we must stop thinking of sensory perception as something that just happens to us. It is something we do. And the more consciously we do it, the more powerfully we can engage with the world. The child who learns to listen deeply, to observe carefully, to distinguish signal from noise, is a child preparing not just for academic success or creative expression. They are preparing for life. Because the world is not of things. It is made of meanings. And meaning begins at the level of the senses. It's easy to assume that all senses are created equal. That sight is no more important than sound, or touch, or smell. But this assumption doesn't hold up under scrutiny. Both biology and psychology suggest otherwise. There is a natural hierarchy to the senses, and this hierarchy is not arbitrary. It is grounded in survival, in attention, and in meaning. When people are asked which sense they would least like to lose, most say sight. Not because the other senses are useless, but because vision provides the structure for so much of how we navigate and interpret the world. Vision is tied to space, to orientation, to motion, to identification. It tells us where we are, what we are near, and what we should do next. It helps us map meaning onto the chaos of our surroundings. But we must be careful not to confuse dominance with value. The fact that sight appears to sit atop the sensory hierarchy does not mean the other senses are somehow less important. In many cases, they carry weight far beyond what we first notice. Smell, for instance, is one of the oldest senses, evolutionarily speaking. It is primitive, deeply linked to memory and emotion. A single scent can bring back a buried moment from childhood with astonishing force. That's not trivial. It's evidence that memory itself is rooted in sensory depth. Taste, similarly, is not just about pleasure or nourishment. It's about safety. Distinguishing bitter from sweet, fresh from spoiled, was once a matter of life or death. Even today, those subtle distinctions keep us grounded in reality. The body never forgets the ancient purpose behind its design. Touch might be the most underappreciated of all. It's the first sense to develop in the womb and the last to fade at the end of life. It gives us boundaries, teaches us where we end and the world begins. A child who is not held, who does not experience nurturing touch, will not develop properly, not just emotionally, but neurologically. That should stop us in our tracks. The power of touch is not symbolic. It's foundational. It is the architecture of connection. And hearing, more than just sound, is the entry point into language, into music, into presence. We often forget that silence is not the absence of hearing, but a form of it. And in silence, we can hear what is beneath the noise. Our own thoughts, our fears, our conscience. Each of these senses serves a unique role in the symphony of perception, but together they form a system, a well-ordered one. And like any system, when its internal hierarchy is respected, it functions more effectively. That's why it matters to understand which sense should lead in which context. In danger, our eyes scan. In conversation, our ears must dominate. In love, it is touch. When we eat, we rely on smell even more than taste. The situation determines the structure. To teach children this, to help them feel the different weight each sense carries in different moments, is to give them an internal compass. And this matters deeply because chaos begins when everything is equal. If we treat all inputs as equally important, we become overwhelmed, overstimulated, and directionless. But if we can teach ourselves and our children to prioritize, to organize perception according to meaning, we give them a tool of clarity. They begin to sort experience rather than drone it. They begin to focus not just their attention, but their identity, because perception is the first filter of meaning. And meaning demands structure. The hierarchy of the senses is not a limitation. It is a guide, a deeply human map for understanding the world and for finding our way through it. If we want to help children understand the power of their senses, we must first help them pay attention to their bodies. Because the body is the ground on which all sensory experience rests. It's not a separate system that occasionally communicates with the brain. It is the system that holds, filters, and responds to every signal the brain receives. To feel your body is to access the core of perception itself. And yet, many children and adults move through the day with almost no awareness of what their bodies are trying to tell them. This disconnection has consequences. When children cannot name or notice what's happening in their bodies, they lose their ability to regulate emotion, to set boundaries, to rest, to focus. The body becomes a stranger instead of a guide. But it doesn't have to be this way. When we invite children to slow down and actually listen, to notice the flutter in their chest when they're nervous, the tightness in their jaw when they're angry, the stillness when they feel calm, we are giving them the foundation for deep emotional intelligence. Because emotions are not ideas. They are physical, and they begin with sensation. This kind of awareness doesn't emerge on its own. It must be cultivated gently and patiently. It can start with the simplest observations. How does your body feel when you're tired? What happens in your stomach when you're excited? Can you tell when you're getting overwhelmed before it becomes too much? These questions are not just about curiosity. They are tools for building inner stability. They teach children that their bodies are not obstacles to overcome or ignore, but sources of wisdom to consult. This connection between body and sense also creates space for grounding. In a world that often pulls children's attention outward, to screens, to noise, to distraction, the ability to return inward is a form of strength. And this isn't vague or mystical. It's practical. A child who learns to take 3 deep breaths when they feel their heart racing is not just calming down. They're beginning to form a relationship with their nervous system. Therapist, that relationship is what allows for resilience because you can't regulate what you can't sense. And you can't lead yourself if you don't know where you are. We must also recognize that sensory sensitivity varies. Some children are more finely tuned to certain types of input. A loud room may feel unbearable. A rough fabric may distract them completely. These aren't a gray fix. These aren't supposed to be fixed. They're signals to be respected. When we help children understand why they react they do, when we help them see patterns between their environment and their reactions, we give them language for experience. And once you can name a pattern, you can begin to work with it. That's not about control. It's about cooperation with the body, with perception, with the self. And when this internal understanding grows, something beautiful happens. The child begins to act from a place of self-awareness instead of reactivity. They recognize their limits without shame. They learn when to step back, when to speak up, when to ask for quiet or for help or for space. That's not weakness. That's self-leadership. And it starts with the senses. It starts with the body. Because if the mind is the map, the body is the compass. So, helping children reconnect with their physical selves isn't a separate task from helping them become sensory heroes. It is the task. Everything flows from that. When a child trusts what they feel, they begin to trust their place in the world. They learn that discomfort can be understood, not feared. That sensations carry messages, not threats. And that listening to the body is not indulgence. It is wisdom. It is the first and most enduring form of intelligence. In the modern world, something strange has happened to our relationship with the senses. We are surrounded by more stimuli than ever before. Brighter screens, louder noises, stronger flavors, constant connectivity. And yet we are increasingly dulled. The paradox is clear. The more we are exposed to, the less we feel. This is the problem of sensory overstimulation, and it's not just a lifestyle issue. It's a developmental, psychological, and even moral one. When the senses are bombarded without restraint, the nervous system cannot distinguish what matters. And when everything feels urgent, eventually nothing does. That's the cost of saturation numbness. Children growing up today encounter this at a younger and younger age. Lights flash in their toys. Music and sound effects layer over each other. Instant gratification becomes the norm, and yet attention spans shrink. Emotional regulation weakens. Empathy declines. Why? Because sensory input is not just entertainment. It is training. The way we take in the world conditions how we respond to the world. And when that input is disordered, relentless, or chaotic, the inner world follows suit. Noise on the outside becomes noise on the inside. That's how you create confusion, distraction, and internal disintegration. But the answer is not to fear sensory experience. It is to understand it. And part of that understanding must include the discipline of deprivation. That's a concept we rarely talk about, especially with children. But it's absolutely essential. You cannot know the power of a sense until you are separated from it. True appreciation begins in the absence of the expected. Silence reveals the weight of sound. Stillness teaches the meaning of motion. Darkness brings sight into focus. Not physically, but emotionally. In the absence of external stimulation, the internal world has a chance to emerge. This is why practices like solitude, fasting, silence, or even simple boredom have deep psychological value. They teach patience, they build tolerance, they sharpen perception, and they reintroduce proportion. A child who has learned to sit in quiet for a few minutes without reaching for a screen is a child who has begun to master their impulses. That's not a small victory. It's foundational. Because the ability to delay gratification, to wait, to listen, these are not just social skills. They are moral capacities. They are the roots of empathy, of conscience, of awareness. We don't develop strength in the presence of constant ease. We develop it when we confront difficulty voluntarily. The same applies to our senses. When we step back from constant stimulation, we create the space necessary for depth. We begin to notice. And when we notice, we connect. Not just with the world, but with ourselves. That's what overstimulation steals from us, our ability to listen to the quiet voice within. And if we lose that voice, we are left directionless, at the mercy of whatever the loudest noise happens to be. So teaching children to respect their senses also means teaching them to protect those senses, to value silence as much as sound, to embrace the dark without fear, to find strength not just in reacting to everything, but in choosing not to react. This is where sensory heroes are made. Not in the thrill of constant sensation, but in the restraint, the clarity, and the presence that follow discipline. We must not mistake stimulation for learning, or distraction for awareness. What children need is not more to look at, more to hear, more to consume. What they need is the courage to pause. And in that pause, they will find not emptiness, but meaning. When a child begins to explore the world through their senses, they are not simply gathering information. They are stepping into the early stages of a profound journey. This journey, whether they know it or not, is a heroic one. It mirrors the oldest stories ever told, the hero leaving the comfort of the familiar, entering the unknown, facing challenges, gaining wisdom, and returning transformed. That's not just myth, that's the deep structure of development. And it begins in its most essential form with perception. Each time a child hears a strange sound and turns to identify it, each time they taste something unfamiliar or recoil from a texture, they are confronting a small unknown. Their nervous system is engaging with novelty, and with it comes the opportunity to grow. But growth is never automatic. It requires courage, because to pay attention is to risk discomfort. It's much easier to tune out, to coast, to be entertained. But those who learn to see instead of just looking, to listen instead of just hearing, Those are the ones who gain real power. They don't just move through the world, they engage with it. And that engagement transforms them. This is where mastery begins, not in knowledge alone, but in perception refined by attention. A child who begins to realize that loud doesn't always mean important, or that bright doesn't always mean good, is developing discernment. And discernment is a heroic trait. It's the ability to sort signal from noise, truth from appearance, meaning from distraction. That sorting is not intellectual at first. It is sensory. You feel the difference before you can name it. And when you begin to name it, you step further into awareness, into agency. Think of the hero in a story. They are never the one who reacts to everything. They are the one who learns to respond with purpose, the one who begins to see what others miss. In many ways, that's exactly what we must help children become. Not passive receivers of the world, but interpreters of it. And not just interpreters, but participants. Because when you realize that your senses are not just tools for taking in, but also instruments for guiding action, then you begin to take responsibility. And responsibility is what separates the child from the hero. That doesn't happen overnight. The process is gradual and filled with setbacks, but every moment of mindful perception is a step forward. A child who begins to notice how their body reacts when a room is too loud or how their mood shifts when they eat too much sugar is not just becoming aware. They are beginning to understand. That understanding leads to self-regulation. And self-regulation is not repression, wisdom. It's the inner strength that says, I don't have to react. I can choose. This kind of sensory maturity is not taught through constant instruction. It is taught through experience, reflection, and challenge. It is taught when we let children feel the discomfort of silence, the awkwardness of waiting, the unfamiliarity of a new taste. It is taught when we help them sit with those sensations instead of immediately removing them. Because the hero doesn't gain strength by avoiding discomfort. The hero gains strength by passing through it. So when we talk about children becoming sensory heroes, we're not romanticizing their biology. We're calling them to something greater, to master not just what they sense, but how they interpret it, respond to it, and grow from it. That is the path of the hero. That is the journey every child is capable of making. If we have the courage to guide them, integration therapists, and the patience to let them discover who they truly are through the deep, often overlooked power of perception. To truly grasp the power of our senses is to recognize that perception is not a neutral act. It is a choice, a responsibility, and in many ways, a moral task. The way we perceive the world determines how we interact with it. It shapes our judgments, our emotions, our decisions, and ultimately our identity. When a child begins to understand that their senses do not just reflect the world, but shape their relationship to it, they are waking up to an astonishing truth. What you focus on determines what kind of life you live. This is not an exaggeration. If you train your attention on what is chaotic, ugly, or shallow, that becomes the world you inhabit. If you train it on what is orderly, beautiful, and meaningful, the world begins to reflect that back to you. It's not about denying what is painful or pretending all is well. It's about learning to see with clarity and to interpret with wisdom. That's why the senses matter so deeply. They are not just passive inputs, they are lenses that color everything. And like any lens, they must be adjusted, maintained, and cleaned. Children do not automatically know what to focus on. They follow movement, sound, and novelty by instinct. But that instinct must evolve. It must be refined into discernment. And this cannot happen if we assume that perception is just something that happens to us. We must teach children and remind ourselves that attention is a skill, that noticing is a form of power, and that what we choose to notice is a statement about what we value. Think about what happens when a child learns to truly observe a painting rather than glance at it, or when they listen not just for words, but for tone, or when they recognize that the scent of rain on pavement makes them feel calm, and they learn to seek that calm when the world becomes overwhelming. These are not trivial experiences. They are deep lessons in awareness. In such moments, perception moves from automatic to intentional. And with that shift comes the first taste of agency. But agency brings weight, because once you realize your senses are shaping your world, you are no longer just a bystander. You are responsible for what you focus on. You are responsible for what you amplify in your environment. That responsibility is subtle at first, but it grows. And with it comes a profound opportunity, the chance to shape your character through how you perceive. Because the child who learns to seek harmony in sound, clarity in sight, and comfort in touch is building not just sensory awareness, but inner order. This is what separates those who are overwhelmed by the world from those who navigate it with purpose. Not a higher IQ or more information, but better attention, more conscious perception. And this kind of attentiveness must be practiced. It must be encouraged, modeled, and protected. Children should be given the freedom to explore, yes, but also the structure to reflect. They should be taught to listen, not just to others, but to their own bodies, their reactions, their rhythms. That is how self-knowledge begins. The sensory world is not neutral territory. It is the battleground on which meaning is formed. If we do not guide children in how to perceive, the world will do it for them. Algorithms, advertisements, noise, and novelty will hijack their attention, and in doing so, shape their values. But if we help them understand that perception is a kind of sacred responsibility, then we give them the tools to resist, to choose, to interpret the world not just accurately, but wisely. And that is the final, perhaps most powerful lesson it is not enough to see. One must learn what to look for. Because what you look for is what you find, and what you find becomes the story you live. That's what it means to be a sensory hero, not just to sense the world, but to engage with it consciously, co-integration therapistly, and with the full way of responsibility that awareness demands.